Welcome to the It's Okay Man podcast. Thank you so much for checking it out. This episode was recorded twice. Cassandra Kleefman, the guest, amazing woman, longtime friend, brilliant psychologist, was gracious enough to record it twice with me. The first one had so many issues with the recording I couldn't even process it or fix it. I tried very hard to do so. So we recorded it again, and there were still issues even though I had tested all the equipment. So instead of recording it a third time, which I thought would lead to a less quality or a diminished quality in the conversation due to regurgitating answers, same questions, that kind of thing, I decided to put in some work on this one and just make it as good as possible. I think I put in probably about 8 hours of work into it to kind of cut it up and do what I could to save it. And it gets a little rough around the 35-minute mark, but it is still listenable in my eyes. So if you cannot make it all the way through, I completely understand. If you do make it through, I applaud you. So whether you're listening to this right when it's released or you're going back and listening to it to go through the backlog because I am some famous podcaster at this point or something, I appreciate you being here and checking it out. So yeah, it is a good conversation. There's some great points, and I hope you enjoy it. And I promise that the next one will be better. So thank you and enjoy. Okay, so this is the It's Okay Man podcast. My name is Tyrone J. Powell, at Tyrone the Philosopher. Thank you for listening. Thank you for coming.
Nice to be here again.
This is Cassandra. She is a sex therapist in Edmonton, Alberta at Transcend Psychological. Yeah, you can tell the people a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, I registered psychologist last 4 years. I have worked specifically in the field of sexual health and supporting that from a psychological perspective.
Okay.
So,
cool.
Yeah, that's what I do.
Yeah, and you love it?
I love it. I love it. It was something that I didn't know that I was going to go in when I was in my undergrad. It had not been the full trajectory that I thought I was going to. But I'm so glad that I work in sexual health now. I think it's just an incredible field to be a part of.
It's rewarding, I assume.
Very. Yeah, I love it.
And where did you go into before?
Forensics.
Okay.
Yeah.
So like with cops?
Working with offenders primarily, actually.
Okay.
Yeah. And that was great. Like I think that still holds a small my heart. But I remember post completing my undergraduate, doing a little bit of search, and then I found Transcend. I found Tammy, and I remember having a meeting with her just about what she did and who she was with, and basically after that it sealed my fate, and I knew that I wanted to work in this field. And
perfect.
Here we are.
Awesome. Okay, so we're here today about masculinity, and you obviously have a lot of insight into it from obviously you're female. But you deal with it specifically in an area that is, I don't know, there's a lot of words you could put there. It's a complicated area for a lot of men, I think. It seems very simple, it's presented as simple, but it's very complicated. So my first question is, what is your definition of masculinity? And let's start there.
My perspective, masculinity is a actually constructed concept that is meant to inform a type of gender role and expression that is traditionally associated with male quality characteristics. I think that falls on a spectrum. So I think that maybe historically we viewed masculinity as a very set sort of idea or a set concept. Now we're seeing that there is some fluidity in motion in terms of just how we might define that.
Right.
But I think that would be the definition that I would work from.
Fair enough. And then I guess in terms of like what is it? You said male qualities. So like, what does it mean to be a man then?
Well, from a social script, a societal script, there's a lot of kind of what I described as like power terms and used in describing masculinity. Things like, men are providers, men are meant to be winners, men are, the protectors, men are all of these kind of I don't know what the word is that I'm looking for, like behaviorally based qualities,
right,
that a lot of people would maybe associate with like strength and power and like taking care of in a very behavioral way. And so because that's how our society views it, that's how most people would define masculinity. But like I said, there is a spectrum there. So I think there's a more acceptance now of other qualities defining of masculinity,
right,
like expression of emotion and capacity to be gentle. And, there's fluidity in how we might see masculine dress or masculine behavior as well.
Yep. Okay, that makes sense. And it's interesting that the last person I spoke to about this, they said, when I defined it as well, some of the qualities you pointed out in like caring and power, but limited power or controlled power, protection, those aren't exclusive to men, right? Like females can have those qualities too. So it really kind of blurs the lines of what a man is. And like the question that comes to mind is like, do we need to define it, right? Like, do we need to have these kind of borders and limitations and guidelines on what it means to be a man?
I don't think so.
Yeah.
But I think our social structure has supported definitions and those lines for so long that it's challenging to completely remove them. I think the younger generations are definitely pushing that kind of momentum, blurring those lines, not having those lines, not needing to define. But I think that's going to take a lot of social change that, quite frankly, we don't have the policy or structure in place to support. And I think that's why defining masculinity is so complicated, because there is still that inherent traditional view that's embedded in how we see our world. And yet there's also this strong push to remove that. And so it's kind of like these two sides battling it out, ultimately needing to meet somewhere.
Right. When we look at that, we're talking about like kids and boys and just the influence. Like, why do you think there's such a pushback from men in the undefining of masculinity?
Well, if men have used that definition for a really time, a anchor for understanding who they are, then removing the anchor, terrifying. You're slipping into territories that are uncomfortable or difficult to manage, and that is really scary for people. So I understand the pushback, especially if the people who are identifying with that traditional masculine view have had that in their experience and their understanding of themselves since they were little.
Right. And the kind of whose book was it? Change by Bell. She talks about, and many others mentioned it as well. But they talk about the excess of feminine qualities into masculinity is like, if boys grow up with the idea that, I don't know, emotion is weak or vulnerability is weakness or any other like physical appearance is weakness or comes off as weakness or is homosexual in nature or whatever, by accepting those into masculinity, they then make me those qualities. Right?
Yeah, it shows up in sexual health related issues and experience too, right? Like what I find so interesting is when I see someone individually, whether male or female, they'll present with the same issue but they'll present it differently. So men tend to present their issue a behavioral perspective.
Right.
I'm not performing. I'm not doing my duty on my job. I'm not doing so correctly. Women will oftentimes present a characteristic. There's something wrong with me, right? Like I am the problem.
Right.
And so I just find that really interesting because I think it actually speaks to how women view themselves differently and view their actions and behaviors and characteristics differently as well.
Right. I know I asked this last time, but in the, I guess, presentation of very like strong masculine influencers and like media and that kind of thing, how do you think those people, I guess, prey on those, we'll call them vulnerabilities, right? Like those mindsets. How do they use that to shape their rhetoric?
I think there's especially with social media, a push in the direction of access to information that has a lot of benefit, but also a lot of harm. And I mean, the benefit comes from, these younger generations have so much access to varying perspectives and varying information and in ways that even you and I did not access to, which is amazing. However, I think the harm comes in when these young folks don't know the right questions to ask or don't know what to look for. So really popular influencers, we'll call them, right? Joe Rogan, Andrew Tate, right? Like these people who have garnered massive followings, they're already going to be chased above maybe other influencers who are lesser known, but have a less harmful message.
Right.
And if a young person doesn't know what they're looking for, they're just going to take in whatever information is available, right? Like we don't. So if we're not asking questions, the algorithm is just going to pump out what it thinks we want to, and then that's all we're going to see. And then that becomes our reality. That becomes the perception of what we believe to be true. And if a young person is really identifying with that perception, it becomes so much harder to then challenge with, broadening that or even alternatives that less harmful to them.
Right. And then that comes into play, like what strikes in my mind, the idea of masculinity being this kind of undefined, unwritten rule thing that nobody really do on. As a boy, like young boy growing up, you see you're acting a certain way, you see movies, you see your dad, and you've got these kind of goals to share, but you can't really ask about them because they are, if you don't know what you're doing, and that's seen as weak. But then when you So when you get on social and you see these people who are telling you this is what masculine is, like, that seems pretty good, right?
Yeah, it's getting that information without having to do the work, if you will. Right?
Yeah.
You don't have to ask the question. You don't have to feel anything about the information even, or think about it. It's just absorbed in these quick little videos, in these snips of a conversation that are heavily edited, meant to be clickbait and meant to be really, really engaging and enticing. I mean, these people know what they're doing when their edits are created, right? So yeah, it's so enticing and it really draws you in, and then it's really hard to let that go if there's that confirmation bias of social media. Right. So friends are acting in a way that aligns with whatever's known to you, or your parents, or who that you really admire in the real world. It just acts to confirm that belief.
Yeah, and you see that even if you make those changes, like some of them have some good ideas in terms of health, physical fitness, or that kind of thing that can be. And if you do those things, you probably will see changes in your life. But it's the rhetoric underlying that comes with is potentially harmful. So how do you see, as a therapist, how have you that presented in some of your couples, or what does that look like?
Well, I think some of the most common issues that I find in my male clients are usually around performance and behavior. That's how they'll be the issue. So, I'm struggling with maintaining an erection, or I'm ejaculating too early, or I'm not performing in the way that I expect myself to perform based on maybe some unrealistic standards I've seen in social media or porn or movies or whatever.
Right.
And so there's that gap between their reality and their sort of expectations or perceptions of what's supposed to happen. And that causes that discomfort, that stress, which leads them to seeking that external support. So, I mean, already I think seeking like myself out is such an amazing step for someone to take. That requires a level of vulnerability that I think, most men are inherently taught to avoid. So I already think it's pretty incredible. But then, oftentimes I'm having to kind of dismantle that mechanism of, let's just talk about behaviors, let's just fix this, and really kind of support my clients in doing the deeper emotional work that's actually required to move whatever it is that's causing the distress.
Right. And so what do you say is the biggest barrier when those issues come up, when you're trying to train somebody from a behavioral mindset, a man, I guess, to, it could be one, I guess, but from a behavioral mind to an emotional mindset or a deeper connection there? What does that look like breaking through?
I think initially it requires just a lot of building that trust, as it would with any client. They need to trust me. They need to feel like I am someone who is on their side. Already that can be challenging because there are those gender differences. So I always try to be mindful of not pushing for that emotion too soon or too much, especially if that's not something that's accessible. However, I don't tiptoe around these things that men are maybe fed, the additional masculine narratives, and I don't tiptoe around, what we know to be true about sexual performance either, right? Like I give them those facts, information straight up, and help them process through how that's impacting what that looks like and what that means, and get to a place of recognizing themselves or understanding how that's showing up for them. Then we move into that deeper work of, maybe it's shame, maybe it is fear of being labeled in a particular what they think is wrong or not acceptable. Maybe it's anxiety, but we try to get to that place where we can unpack those feelings. And that's where the work really begins.
The breakthroughs.
The breakthroughs, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and it's interesting, we're talking about masculinity in general, but those are kind of like the fundamentals of any therapy, right? Kind of breaking down and getting past the secondary emotion or the wall that's there and finding out the root cause of it and addressing that through prevention or,
And I always tell people, like, sex therapy is really any different than regular therapy. Like, I'm specially trained in sex-related concepts and treatment approaches, but looks is fundamentally the same as any other therapeutic approach or experience. We just talk about penises and vaginas and all of that.
It's more specific content.
Yeah, right. And I think that's what can deter people from seeking out sexual health related psychological support. So what's going to happen? Is this going to be like Sue Johansson, whipping out a dildo, telling me how to use it?
Might make it fun.
It's not that at all. But sex is something that is so taboo still in our society.
Why do you think that there's such this taboo and it's just kind of separated? And obviously in different religions and upbringings, there's so many different factors, but all the knowledge we have, why do you think that it's still so separated when we understand the benefit, even when we look at some of the Alberta government's regulations that they put on sex education for younger people? Yeah, why do you think it is so labeled as bad?
Well, it's so interesting because it's like the two extremes are clawing at each other's throats right now, trying to win. So we have what I think you and I grew up with, what most kind of 30 plus folks grew up with, which is it's taboo. Think about it, keep it behind a closed door, et cetera, et cetera. And you have, the younger folks, early 20s, who it's all they're seeing is like sex positivity in a way,
Yeah.
where it's just, sex is great, sex is awesome, never any issues, it's so fun, rah rah, sex, right? So you have these two extremes. The reality is that we are somewhere in the middle. That's where we want to be, is some middle, where it's like sex is awesome and can be a great experience. It's not going to be necessarily true for everyone, and supports and resources to kind of cultivate, support that if it's not true for people. So those two sides kind of back out, and I think the reason that the taboo side is still so prevalent is because people don't know maybe how to let go of that rhetoric. They've never been to think otherwise, so how to let it go if someone challenges you. And number two, I think because we don't know how to look for different information if it's not outright in our face, right? So if it's not, on the global news morning, how are we going to know to question our beliefs?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I think you brought up a really good point there. It's like with some of the questions I had growing up, it's like I didn't know that I could search for it, right? Like, and all we have Google, but I don't even know that that's a question I should ask. I don't even know that there is a different way of thinking about it, or if it's normal, whatever it is, or whatever's going on, right?
And all that access to information is amazing, but if you don't know what to put in your search engine, you are not going to come up with that alternative answer. So you can very easily find information that affirms the beliefs that you already have. Unless seeking that external support challenge you in some way, you're not necessarily just going to stumble upon something that challenges that view.
Yeah,
right?
Especially with algorithms and all that stuff like we talked about, right?
I mean, when social media and all of that was coming out, there was a better chance of that because the algorithms weren't, as prominent or as well as developed. But nowadays it is, you click on one video and a second later your entire feed is related to that one video.
Yeah.
So it's so easy to get tunnel vision trapped in what you're seeing.
So let's say we break away from that. Like, it seems that kind of rhetoric now, and there's like the phone and anti-social media movements for kids under 16, like Australia just recently passed. There's movements here. If we are moving away from real sex education in the curriculum, in the K-12 curriculum, how do we create that proper education for kids outside?
I think it's with, our generation and generations that are having kiddos now, have young kiddos. It starts with us working through our own sex education, trying to dismantle that intergenerational cycle by being more supportive of our kids having a better education, especially if the policies that are currently in place from the government around education in school are not conducive to that comprehensive sex education.
So take it into our own.
Yeah, pretty much. Until we have, I think, supportive policies in place that are going to continue to try and grow with the health curriculum and expand it, have it be, based in evidence and research until that becomes normal. If that becomes normal, it kind of we have to be able to kind of dismantle that ourselves or provide that comprehensive education ourselves as parents, future generations, and that in and of itself poses a problem if, again, don't even know what to look for.
Yeah. And I guess, like, it feels so daunting for a generation that was taught differently.
I see a lot with the clients that come through where when we talk about the social structures in their life, friends, family, work, especially folks around our age and older, it's not talking, right? Talking about sex with our friends is terrifying to folks or completely unheard of. Whereas my younger clients, my under 30s, a lot of them are like, oh yeah, we talk about it. But again, it's skewed towards the positive, which I think is just so interesting because they're all talking about the positives of sex, how great it is, how awesome it is, have just very sex positive language. And so then clients who maybe have struggles don't feel like they have the space to speak either. Right? So we're swinging between two extremes, and we need that round, which is usually where my services will kind of come in, is presenting that space for someone to have the middle ground of.
Of the problems, the problems that exist that nobody kind of talks about. Right? And I think that's another portion of the taboo section, right? It's like, one, it can be taboo to talk general for some, and then others it's like, okay, well, it's either good or it doesn't happen, right? Which is all centered around shame, really.
And there's of unidentified shame that I see around and into just in general. And I think with males specifically and my male clients, how that presents often around the idea of not performing in the way that they are expected to or should. A lot of shoulding around sex and intimacy. I'm not saying it doesn't happen with my female clients as well, just that it's my male clients. I should be lasting longer. I should be to do this. I should be able to do that. I should be able to, have my partner experience an orgasm in 2.5 seconds because that's what I see in porn. There's a lot of internalized expectation around how to be a sexual person as a male. That is reinforced by the fact that no one is talking just how normal it is to experience erectile fluctuations, or no one is talking about penis insertion and ejaculation, right? Like, no one's talking about normal sex. Everybody's talking about the extremely negative sex that they're maybe having.
Or just making stuff up.
That happens all the time, right? Like, I'll have some clients tell me what their friends are saying. Like, I really want to meet your friend, and
bring them in here.
Bring them in here, and let's let information to this. I highly doubt that that's rhetoric or there's a lot of assumption too, right? So if your circle is primarily other males, right, as like friends or family members or whatever, and you're getting a version of that tunnel talk, right? Because you're all sharing the kind of locker room of sex, and insert like a female, just a single female into that, and she will shut down all of those harmful beliefs, right? Especially around what I call like the myth of the magical penis, where the penis is this amazing thing that can produce wonderful orgasms for women, and it's so great and so central to sexual experience. A woman, and she'll immediately dismantle it because it's not for us in the same way that is true for men. So it's really interesting just knowing those social dynamics, how they're influencing someone's perspective on themselves as a sexual person.
From a male perspective, it's like there's a lot of just smoke and mirrors. It's like we're kind of this little cloud of this little bubble of our own conversation around what sex should be, what it is, and then as soon as we have to actually have it, it's not that, and then we go back to our circle. We can't say it's not that, so we have to play a part almost, right? Well, and that's kind of how it has been, but I would say, in my experience and my age, things are changing a little bit. Like, it feels like they are, but like we said earlier, there's just this pushback to kind of polar opposite views on what maintaining the status quo. And in order for the other side, we'll call it, to accept that, they have to kind of admit that they've been lying this whole time, which is probably not going to happen.
Or at the very least, just acknowledging what is influencing, right, that perspective, influencing expectations. Is it that locker room talk? Is it the porn that we're watching? Is it those beliefs that we grew up with? And being able to acknowledge that is such a critical step and be able to move through that shame. Right? Because if we can acknowledge what's holding that shame in place, it just stays stuck. And a lot of the performance issue-based experiences that my male clients will come in with, like, erectile dysfunction, premature ejaculation, a lot of it is psychologically based. It's, I know a physician might some Viagra at it, that will I'm sure be great for blood flow, but that's not going to be helpful at all with the underlying issue, the psychological distress that's occurring for them. If they're experiencing erectile fluctuations, right? And I think that's another huge part of the problem, is these issues are being reinforced through professionals,
Right.
and the way they're interacting with it, right? If a physician, and I'm not trying to shit on doctors, like they've got so much going on, they're doing their best, and they're doing but I think it would be so powerful if a person having erectile difficulties went into his physician's office and they just asked how they were doing, like how they felt about it, or if they were just like, hey, like, sure, I'll prescribe what I think could be helpful, but also maybe there's something else going on. Maybe you should talk to somebody too, you know? And I think that that's just really a systemic sort of structural issue in how all of these different disciplinaries, healthcare disciplinaries, don't talk to each other.
Yeah.
So the physicians and doctors live in their world, psychs live in their world, Joe lives in their world. I try really hard in my practice to get us all working together, but if that's not happening, then doctors only from what they know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, and I have personal experience with that. I was having fluctuations. I heard it put as fluctuations. It's a better word than difficulties. But yeah, fluctuations. I went to the doctor. They gave me some pills. It still didn't work, and I had to go down my own journey of figuring it out myself. And it was very hard to admit and understand and search for, and it was super confusing. The pills that were supposed to work didn't work.
Yeah.
Right. And then it's like, okay, well, that's not the answer. That's not the solution, right? But there was no information given to me. I had to admit that there was a different issue, which I could see as being a strong barrier to some people. I could have been angry at women or anything else, right? As opposed to saying, well, that's just how my mind works in terms of, okay, well, this didn't work. Like, maybe it's something else. And I can really see that could go wrong for a lot of different styles of thinkers.
Yeah, and that's usually erectile fluctuations. That is how I've always talked about them. Like, I very rarely will say something like erectile disorder or dysfunction. I'm like, very few people have bacteria. Most people are just experiencing situations and difficulties being reinforced by the psychological distress, the anxiety, the fear. But usually I end up seeing folks who are house fluctuations after treatment from a medical has failed, after they've taken the pills, but they're still experiencing stress. And then they see me and they're like, why am I still, and it's my job to be like, well, more to your capacity as a person in sex than how hard your penis is. Like, you're more than that as a sexual person. And I think women are inclined to know that inherently. Men less so. And we see that pop up in the research all the time as well. Just in how people will describe themselves as sexual people. Women tend to be more inclusive of logical factors. Men, not so much. Men, it's very behavior-based. So the idea of like, penis isn't, hard or how it's supposed to be there. I'm not how I'm supposed to be as a sexual person. And I do a lot of work dismantling that and helping folks expand their definition of who they are as a person into the realms of their emotional selves and their spiritual selves and beyond just the penis.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. So the summary, to reflect back to you, there's just so many different realms. Do you have like almost like a pie chart as kind of got in my mind of like different realms? Can you list them of what a sexual being is, or like what a person is in the sexual relationship?
I definitely go very holistic. Of course, there is like the physical self, but then there is the emotional self. There's the self, there's the cognitive, intellectual self, the psychological self, if you will. There's a social self, right? And then there's kind of layers in each of those that are conditioned layers, like reinforced, or layers that we've, and then there's the authentic, right? What's below that? So I think within each of those realms, there's competing pieces of what I've been taught to be, what I've been conditioned to, and what I actually am, who I actually am.
Right.
And it's interesting because I find that, you know, folks who are reaching out to therapists for support or looking for that information, it's that authentic voice that's like, hey, maybe like that's not just, you know, it. Like maybe there's something else out there.
Right.
Little voice in your head that I think is the authentic voice that's saying to that person, you know, don't give up on this just yet. Maybe there's something else out there that can help.
Mm-hmm. In the relationship, like in, I guess, with your couples, like what do you see on the other side when a couple comes in and they're having issues and a man is kind of having it through, like, I don't know, what is the effects on the female, and what do they look for? What is their kind of role in the change as well?
Well, first of all, I these traditionally masculine scripts is reinforced by men. They are reinforced as well, right? Because just as men are brought up with them, we're also brought up with them, and vice versa. So I do think that women can play, or female can play a critical role in how much stress or discomfort the issue causes, depending on how they respond to it. And I've had a lot of male clients express the hurt is caused when a female might say something like, "What's wrong with you? Why isn't your penis working the way that it's supposed to work?"
Right.
Or they'll make it about themselves.
Yep.
Am I not attractive to you anymore? Right? Like, what's wrong that you don't like you just don't want to fuck me? Like they'll say like that. So harmful in that moment, because usually not the case, right? That's usually not what's contributing to that experience, and the moment will become a part of the narrative that creates more anxiety around the next time. So I think, you know, as we've been talking a lot about how men can force that belief, but women play a role in it too. And what's really important when I'm doing couples work, when we're talking about that, is making sure that, you know, the female acknowledges that in these instances and owns up to it and takes the responsibility of, you know, causing that harm. And we work towards repairing that together.
Yep.
And that's such a critical piece of moving through, right? And sometimes, you know, sometimes there's maybe an unwillingness, or the hurt is just too deep. And we might handle or approach that a little bit differently, but for the most part, if I'm working with couples, they're usually really, really good about, oh shit, I hadn't realized just how damning that kind of comment could be. I didn't even realize saying what I was saying or how harmful it was, and moving towards that and turning towards each other again.
Yeah. And yeah, bringing that up is very interesting. Like, I have personal experience with that, and just because you're feeling shame, but then you're also having to up somebody at the same time and say it's not you. You can't really focus on yourself, and you can't, and then you're trying to perform for someone else even more so, right? Not even trying to reach standards for yourself, but you're trying to not hurt somebody's feelings, right? Which is just, and then it's like at the slightest sign of something wrong, then your mind spirals, right? So yeah, it is absolutely two-sided. And I think that there's a lot goes on there on the female side or on the other side, I guess, and where that could go.
And I think that when I am working with a heterosexual couple, and it's primarily talking about here, interesting because I don't see that nearly often in my queer couples. So in lesbian couples, queer couples, this isn't so interesting. And the research supports this as well. So we find that sexual satisfaction, sexual distress, orgasm are much more present in heterosexual dynamics.
Oh, really?
And I think that from heterosexual dynamics being more susceptible to the closed off mindset and rhetoric, whereas other dynamics, it's been shown, you know, they're much more open, expanding, exploring, removing those kind of borders.
It comes down to gender roles. That's so interesting. I saw a stat that queer marriages or queer bonding or queer couples that live together or whatever, they are less by gender roles. They have a better relationship because they simply talk about who's going to take garbage, blah, blah, blah. They don't us that the guy's going to do it because he's the guy, right? Yeah. They simply just talk about it, which probably just translates to the bedroom as well, or relationship in terms of what these expectations are, how to please each other.
Especially lesbian dynamics. There is a physical penis, so that sort of pressure on the penis to be the one achieve orgasm or anything is just not. So it's interesting because I believe the gap in a heterosexual dynamic. So studies said that 96% of the males experience orgasm in the last experience, 63% of the females in a heterosexual pairing. In a lesbian pairing, it was high 80s for both partners experiencing. So the gap just did not exist, right? Because there weren't any like penis involved in that experience. So there is this sort of pressure, I think, put on folks with a penis or in a heterosexual dynamic to perform in a particular way. And also this kind of idea that like their orgasm is the achievement, the end goal. It's like that's when sex is over, is once the penis has ejaculated, and then we carry on with our lives. And I think that's why that gap exists, and women in heterosexual dynamics are reporting much lower of orgasm. Right. Number one, we don't have nerve endings deep within the canal. We would not birth if we did.
That's fair, yeah.
So a lot of our nerve endings are in the area of the vagina and obviously our clitoris, right? Most women do not experience clitoral stimulation from penetration. Right. If that's all you're doing, right? If that's all that's a part of the rhetoric is my penis converted into a vagina and then orgasm happens for me, and then I assume orgasm is for my partner, that gap is gonna be maintained. And again, this isn't just maintained by men, but I think it's maintained by the female partners. Yeah,
that comes to mind is like faking orgasm and things like that, right?
Very common.
In terms of just like maintaining the status quo for what the sexual relationship is, and then, I don't know, uploading the guy's version of what it is and maintaining it so that it seems good, right?
Well, and from the same study, the male partner said that, so 80s, I think it was 86, like exactly, it was mid-80s, reported believing that their partner had an orgasm.
Sure.
So the women reported 6%, then 6% of men thought they had it, so that's 20% gap between reality and perception. Yeah. So someone's lying, right? or we're not talking, we're not asking the questions of one another that are necessary to understand how to satisfy each other sexually. So I don't know, on a tangent there about that, but really,
that's why we're here.
I think it's just so interesting, the discrepancies between male perception, female perception in heterosexual couplings. Sex is supposed to look like.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Sorry, I'm so distracted with all the tech issues we have. I feel like I'm like spacing out every 10 minutes. But yeah, it's interesting because it seems like the solution is very simple in terms of discussing it, communicating, but it's complicated to get there.
Yes, correct.
Right? It requires vulnerability on both sides. It requires an open the experience of the other. It requires the communication. It requires avenues of education and information. It requires society. There's so many different things that put to it. So how do you think that changes? How do we, like, we're obviously taking steps with this conversation and things like that, but what do you think the most important demographic is? Do you think that it should be focused on men? It should be women? Like, where's the most way to change that rhetoric?
I think it's within each person's individual circle. If you ask yourself the question of am I talking to these people about sex in a real and authentic? And your answer to that question, no. That's where you start. A conversation, you know. And I know you experienced this firsthand, the dinner table conversations between, you know, your wife and I when we all lived together. So, I mean, that was uncomfortable for you at the start, I imagine, but then over time you got very used to us.
Yeah, at the dinner table that I didn't like. Like, it's like, I'm trying to eat here. Yeah.
But that's great.
Any other times.
You know? You would often walk in on us talking about anything and everything related to sex, and of course we're being pelvic floor physio. That made sense, right? Us talking in that way, but that's where it starts. You know, is talking with your friends about these. And I even in my own circles as a therapist, asking myself that question and realizing that I wasn't talking to the people in my circle as much as I could be. Real and authentic sexual experiences. So I think that's where it starts, is just your own inner circle, your own world, opening up those dugs, and ripple effect, you know, hoping that it expands from there. And then those people are going to go to their inner circles and talk more, or ask questions or seek professional support in some capacity.
And I think that's one of the I've worked in counseling, is that, like, I've taken some of those concepts of opening up to my inner circle, the ones I tell people to do, and I've started implementing in my own life in terms of some good friends, like starting to open up about them, about what's going on in my life, and emotions and worries and fears, and all I've found is that it's like strengthened so much. Like, they opening up to me, and all of a sudden we trust each other more, and it's just like, oh, okay, well, I have these, I'm not so isolated in my experience, right? And then all of a sudden, there's more perspective on my own situation. I'm not being to myself about things, trying to figure it out or stressing out. It's like, okay, I can just get it out and I can talk, and I can go from there, right? And I think applying that to the sexual relationship, it's tough being another person, right? Like, you almost have to have permission from your partner to do so, in a way, is what it feels like.
Yeah, I can especially see that as true for, like, male clients. I mean, I'm not saying that women don't have to ask permission, of course, but women are inherently likely to open up about problems because we want that validation or that support from our, especially other female friends, or inclined to open up about issues or experiences. Not always, but certainly more. Whereas I've heard from a lot of my male clients that that's not true in male dynamics, right? It can feel very vulnerable, almost like you're almost needing this permission to talk about your sexual experiences. And I think it's important to keep it focused on yourself, right? Like, I don't think it's fair to about your partner's perceived experience with other people unless you have their permission. But I do see value in opening up your experience. Like, hey, I'm struggling with intimacy, right? And I firmly believe that any sort of issue within a sexual dynamic is very rarely one-sided. There's always something else going on between people involved that is contributing, but there can still be that that value and sometimes relief in just being like, yeah, I'm struggling, and your friend, I get that. Like, I've struggled with that, or you know, hey, I'm actually struggling with that too.
Yeah, the connection there. I wonder, like, the question in my mind is, like, I wonder where that changes in, like, a boy, right? I'm trying to think of my own experience growing up, and it was like, okay, we junior high, I was introduced to porn from a friend. He's like, check this out, and it's like, okay, well, then you're that road, and all of a sudden you've got these whatever fake ideas of what sex is, and then suddenly you get into late junior high, grade in high school, and there's more sexuality or expectations.
Hormones pumped through everyone.
Yeah, I've got a guy talking about high body count, it's absurd for a grade 11, and it's just like standards for myself. And how do I even approach that, right? How do you ask, how do you tell a boy that, like, hey, your whole peer group going to be comparing these things and judging each other on these metrics, And if you don't meet the metrics, you are not man, even though you're not a man, you're a 16-year-old boy.
Yeah.
So you shouldn't man yet anyways. But you also should ask, even though it's going to make you look like you're a loser, right? Like that's so complicated. And like as a father of a boy, I'm like, how am I going to have that conversation, right? How am I going to tell my boy? I'll probably try and start as early as possible, right? And just like keep conversations as open and as fluid and as non-judgmental and standard, and hope that he goes into the world and worried about what his peers think of him as questions, right?
Well, and I think you're right in the sense that it starts with that family dynamic around sex and conversation about sex and sexuality. If the home is open, not only in a way, but just in a open to issues, non-issues, questions, concern, victories, whatever, that's supportive of that young person able to, maybe set themselves or ask those questions or feel maybe more secure in their experience, even if their peers are different ones.
Right.
Now, I do think that as parents, we're probably going to fuck up in some way. I think it's also just important to own that too, right? And I think kiddos learn a lot from us being able to own experience. So even sharing our experiences with our kids, like, hey, like, I was introduced to sex and like this is what I learned from that. This is what I know about that now, or why I felt this was harmful. It might be a bit of an awkward conversation, but if you've already established that openness across other contexts, it can be really easy to, not easy, but to transition that into talking about sex. Right? Like if it's within the household that we just talk about anything.
Yeah, exactly.
Then it does make it a little easier to have that same mentality of sex, regardless of what's kind of happening outside the family. And I always say that it can just take one person. Like it just takes one trusted adult or person that young kiddo respects or admires or looks up to really set that path of openness and vulnerability and discovery. So I think it has to take mountains in order to create that safe for someone. I think it just takes one person being to experience a little bit of discomfort in order to support a young person trying to find themselves.
Perfect. Okay, well, I think we'll put it up here. It's been about an hour if I check the clock. Yeah, I know, right? Faster this time, actually. Yeah, so thanks for coming on. I guess for a final question, what is, I guess, your advice if you were to give to somebody right now that would change their life or has changed your life? Is one thing you have to say?
Even at the table, talk about it, because if you're authentic in your curiosity, in your experiences, in issues that you're maybe having, that opens up the door to asking the right question, getting the right information. And if you're uncertain of where to look, there's always professionals within the community that can help guide that.
Right.
So just talk about it.
Just talk about sex. Perfect. Okay, thanks, Cassandra.
Thank you.